Welcome to the InnoGuide podcast, where we share the works of authors and mentors to guide innovation. I'm your host, Bob Boudelier. This podcast, my website, and my community are focused on helping you discover the secrets of innovation in the age of AI. Since I don't rely on paid ads, I want to thank our customers who bring me onto their programs as a technical product accelerator, working alongside their teams to help them develop products smarter and faster without adding risk, while bringing human-centered AI skills into their organizations. You can learn more at www.innoguide.net. In this episode, number 99, we'll be sharing part 1 of Incorruptible by Eric Ries. What if the biggest threat to your company's mission isn't a lack of vision or bad leadership, but the very success you're working so hard to achieve? That's the unsettling premise behind Eric Ries' new book, Incorruptible, and it's one that should make every executive team pause. Ries argues that without deliberate structural protections built into a company's founding documents and governance from the very beginning, powerful external and internal forces will almost inevitably begin to favor short-term profit over long-term mission. Many companies that started with genuine purpose have been pulled off course, not because their leaders stopped caring, but because the systems they operated within rewarded extraction over endurance. For medtech companies especially, where the mission involves patient outcomes and meaningful innovation, this drift can have consequences far beyond the balance sheet. Today we're looking at the first half of the book to understand exactly how this happens and what it takes to build a company that can stay true to its vision for decades, not just until the next funding round or acquisition. So let's get started. Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup Method and The Lean Startup Way, spent his entire career helping founders build remarkable companies. He watched them launch with bold visions, scale rapidly, attract incredible talent, and then, more often than he'd like to see, he's watched many of them get systematically dismantled from within, not by external competitors, but by their own success, their own structures, and their own compromises. Eric says that realization crystallized one evening when the professor called him. He discovered something extraordinary, an AI capable of designing medicine to fight cancer and Alzheimer's. Breakthrough technology, world-changing potential. But here's what haunted him. The same technology could create bioweapons. His potential recruits kept asking him the same questions over and over again. How do you guarantee the company won't sell out when investors demand short-term profits? How do you protect your soul? I recognized that fear immediately because I'd heard it countless times before, he says. His book, The Lean Startup, gave a generation of founders powerful tools to build and scale rapidly. It created massive value. But he never taught them how to protect what they built. That same night, he attended what he thought was a celebration for another founder. Thousands of people had flown in from across the country, except it wasn't a party. It was a wake. After years of relentless pressure to abandon the ethos that made his company extraordinary, after being forced to prioritize stock price over product and customers, this founder had been ousted. The billions he'd created weren't enough. When the professor asked him, could his company avoid this future? Eric told him the truth. He wasn't on track. He'd already taken steps in the wrong direction. But then he discovered something crucial. Over the following weeks, he learned that this corruption, and that's what he calls it, not mission drift or bureaucracy, it's not inevitable. It's not some immutable law of business physics. There are outliers everywhere. Vanguard, Patagonia, Costco. They've scaled massively while remaining purpose-driven and genuinely profitable. We dismiss them as exceptions, but if there are so many exceptions scattered across industries and continents, maybe the rule itself is broken. The answer lies in how these organizations are structured. They begin with something genuinely worth protecting, an aspirational mission aligned with human flourishing, paired with a principled ethos that instills determination to see it through. And they build governance structures that violate practically every conventional business practice we've been taught. These mission-driven organizations generate authentic trust and loyalty. They refuse to exploit customers or trade long-term endurance for short-term rewards. Here's what matters most. Success and hard work alone aren't enough. A weak structure leaves any organization vulnerable to being captured regardless of your aspirations. The companies that endure share distinct characteristics. They cultivate extreme internal alignment, demonstrate superlative care, and pursue missions centered on human flourishing. But more importantly, they forge governance structures that resist corruption. The evidence is overwhelming. Mission-driven organizations systematically outperform conventional competitors. They deliver superior shareholder returns, create more value than they capture, and are far more likely to endure across generations while staying true to their intentions. These aren't fringe companies or niche experiments. Organizations with mission-controlled structures represent a significant portion of global GDP, millions of employees, trillions in value. The contemporary financial system enables bad actors to profit without creating value. Many people claim it's impossible to be both truly mission-driven and successful. They insist exploitation is simply the way it is. But these techniques have deep precedents, extensive research backing them, and proven track records in global-scale companies. They're simply invisible to most leaders. This book provides a concrete alternative to the current best practices. Whether you're founding a company, selecting an employer, or deciding which organizations deserve your trust, you now have genuine choice. He'll explore why well-intentioned companies betray their promises, provide specific tools for building incorruptible organizations, and demonstrate how the strongest companies reshape entire industries. We're at an inflection point, he says. Breakthrough technologies could serve humanity or corrupt it. If we build institutions to be incorruptible from the start, we can usher in an era of true human flourishing. That design is available now. No waiting required. So here are stories of two extraordinary business leaders separated by nearly 2 centuries, whose stories reveal something fundamental about how success really works and why it so often gets destroyed. Eric was born in San Diego in 1978, just 3 years after a pivotal moment in retail history. Saul Price, the founder of FedMart, was ousted from his own company despite creating something revolutionary. Here was a man who'd built 40 thriving stores generating over $350 million in annual sales without spending $1 on advertising. Yet, in December 1975, the board voted them out, and that night they changed the locks on his office doors. He was out. What makes this betrayal particularly stinging is that Price wasn't just another retailer. He was a visionary operating from a radically different playbook. Born to immigrant parents during the Depression, he brought a fiduciary's ethics to retail. He ranked his priorities explicitly: customers first, employees second, stockholders third. He capped margins because he believed you shouldn't make too much money off people. He paid workers double the prevailing wage and created policies guaranteeing fair treatment and personal growth. FedMart's success rested on 3 mutually reinforcing principles: intelligent loss of sales by limiting inventory to high-volume items, what I call harder is easier thinking, says Eric, and trust as ultimate currency. But investors saw these principles as obstacles to profit maximization. They couldn't see that the trust Price had built meant his customers remained fiercely loyal. The aftermath was swift and devastating, but not for Price. FedMart's new leadership abandoned his philosophy, spent $150 million trying to replace it with conventional practices, and by 1982, all 46 stores closed. 8,000 workers lost their jobs. The investors destroyed the golden goose. Meanwhile, Price signed a lease for Suite 729 a week after being locked out. Price Club would eventually power a $400 billion enterprise. But before Price's redemption, there's an earlier tragedy to understand. Robert Owen's story from 1800 Scotland. Owen believed his profitable worker welfare reforms would naturally spread, but that capitalism's own logic would force competitors to adopt his humane methods. But instead, his investors repeatedly betrayed him. In 1809, 1813, and finally 1828, shareholders removed him because they viewed his social programs as expensive. Owen died essentially bankrupt, disillusioned. This pattern repeats with stunning consistency across centuries. Saul Price and Owen, separated by geography and time, independently discovered identical truths. Treating employees, customers, and communities well creates exceptional financial results. Yet both were systematically dismantled by their own investors. He calls this recurring phenomenon enlightened capitalism, a trap where entrepreneurs Build exceptional companies through humane principles, assume markets will protect what they've created, then watch helplessly as it unravels. These aren't ordinary competitive failures. These are what he terms unusual failures. Companies whose success paradoxically causes their destruction. Look at the Sears catalog. It thrived under employee profit sharing until leadership changed. Blockbuster Video generated $800 million annually from late fees before activist investor Carl Icahn forced out the CEO, who was trying to end late fees, leading to bankruptcy in 2010. Polaroid's innovation culture was systematically dismantled. Cadbury withstood 170 years before Kraft's hostile takeover destroyed its soul. Toys R Us was profitable when private equity saddled it with an artificial debt. Circuit City gutted customer service while spending billions on stock buybacks. Looking at 200 years of data reveals a chronic disease, not marketplace failures, but shareholder sabotage. Fundamental problem is that these companies lack structural safeguards to protect what made them valuable. Achievement became a liability precisely because nothing prevented those in control from extracting value while destroying its source. So here's the crucial part. Exceptions do exist. Costco thrived with Saul Price's low-margin model. The John Lewis Partnership maintained profit sharing since 1929, and most remarkably, Novo Nordisk, founded in 1922 by a Nobel laureate couple, established itself as a for-profit company controlled by a nonprofit foundation. For over a century, it has endured every threat that destroyed its competitors. The question isn't whether external pressures will come. We know they will. But how is your organization architected to withstand them? We can't build organizations that actually withstand pressure until we understand what forces are pushing against them. Organizations that survive understand three things. Successful organizations outlive their founders and need internal character strong enough to carry their mission through multiple generations. Every organization faces relentless pressure to abandon its mission for short-term gains. And modern business culture pushes extractive thinking everywhere. The only antidote is a constitutional foundation with genuine tensile strength. As we march ahead, we're going to dig deep into how organizations can stay true to their essential purpose across generations. But we must start here with the first, most fundamental problem. Leaders have a dangerous tendency to lose control of the very things they create. So here's a puzzling question that haunted a CEO that Eric recently counseled. He'd founded his multi-billion-dollar company 15 years ago with a crazy idea nobody believed in. But now that it was successful, he wanted to pivot toward AI innovation, but his organization was mysteriously resisting him at every turn. Sales wouldn't sell it, developers wouldn't develop it, marketing wouldn't promote it, nobody was explicitly blocking the initiative. It was as if the company itself had developed a will of its own, completely separate from his leadership. And that brought him to a deeper question. If he wasn't in control, then who was? The answer lies in what he calls organizational ethos, a concept he borrows from Aristotle, who used it to describe the habit or character that defines a person. Every organization develops a deep, consistent character that shapes decisions in ways you'll never find in any org chart or employee handbook. This isn't just culture or strategy, it's something far more fundamental. His insight came from studying emergent intelligence, a phenomenon where groups develop capabilities that don't exist in any individual member. Researchers at MIT discovered something remarkable. Human teams, much like ant colonies, develop measurable collective intelligence under the right structural conditions. Groups develop their own moral compass, their own learning patterns, and their own decision-making preferences that persist even across leadership changes. Some organizations consistently favor innovation, while others prize stability. These patterns are measurable and identifiable. Organizations develop character. This explains a haunting question from Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath. Who is the bank? When the tenant farmers confronted those carrying out evictions, nobody could identify who actually made the decision. The bank was a faceless system, the monster. Men made it, but they couldn't control it. His CEO experienced that same bewilderment. He wasn't fighting his people. He was wrestling with a superorganism that had developed its own character, its own preferences, and its own will to survive. His personal ethos of innovation was at war with the organization's emergent character, which craved safety and certainty. But here's where this becomes fascinating. This organizational power cuts both ways. When 3M's new CEO tried imposing shareholder-focused efficiency measures on their innovation-driven culture, the organization fought back. Scientists resisted the new bureaucracy. The board, having tracked the new product vitality index for decades, watched it plummet and recognized the treatment was killing the patient. They replaced the CEO with someone aligned with 3M's historical ethos. But the same dynamic plays out very differently at Boeing. Boeing brought in James McNerney to apply the financial engineering playbook that made Jack Welch famous at GE. The strategy was straightforward: prioritize shareholder returns above all else. The company that once lived for engineering excellence began funneling $68 billion back to shareholders through buybacks and dividends. As financial metrics took center stage, something darker happened inside the company. Engineers knew the 737 MAX was dangerous. They documented problems, raised concerns, and internally called out design flaws in brutal terms. One engineer wrote that the airplane was designed by clowns who in turn are supervised by monkeys. But management's response never varied: costs, deadlines, stock price. Months before the crashes, employees were asking each other whether they'd put their families on a MAX simulator-trained aircraft. Their answer was no. They knew, but they shipped it anyway. October 29th, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 crashed into the Java Sea. 189 people died. March 10th, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 crashed 6 minutes after takeoff. 157 more people died. Passengers from 35 nations, including UN workers, Catholic Relief Services staff, and families. The troubling part? You can't pin this on McNerney alone. He'd already retired and been named CEO of the Year in 2015. The culture he established outlived him. Unlike at 3M, where the immune system rejected his methods, Boeing's organization fully embraced them. This brings us to the fundamental problem. Can a superorganism apologize? When a new CEO issues a corporate apology, what's it actually worth? They'll be gone in a few years. No individual can bind a superorganism to promises their successor won't keep. The real lesson is uncomfortable. Organizations develop their own character independent of any single leader. Leadership still matters, but not through command. Like physical health, organizational ethos requires constant daily practice. There's no steady state. Every day it either strengthens or decays, and that matters more than ever, because whatever technology an organization creates will amplify whatever values or lack thereof are already embedded in its culture. So now let's talk about an invisible force so powerful it shapes how organizations behave, how leaders decide, and ultimately how companies live or die. He calls it financial gravity. Now the name might sound abstract, but the concept is deeply practical. Think back to Newton. His discovery of gravity laws didn't stop human flight, it enabled it. Understanding the force was the prerequisite to defying it, and the same principle applies here. Organizations face three phenomena that seem inexplicable until you understand financial gravity. First, investors routinely destroy valuable companies through short-term decisions that make no sense on the spreadsheet alone. Second, companies across wildly different industries develop identical symptoms. The same bureaucracy, hollow culture, obsession with quarterly targets, suggesting something deeper than individual greed or incompetence is at work. And third, advisors and board members consistently push generic best practices rather than protect distinctive missions, as if they're captured by something larger than their clients' actual interests. Financial gravity is the psychological pressure created by resource imbalances. Investors control capital, employers control livelihoods, markets control valuations. These aren't theoretical concerns. They're genuine incentives that trigger ancient reflexes. We're wired to track who controls the resource we need. That chest tightness before disagreeing with someone who holds your paycheck, that's gravity. That nodding along in meetings to ideas you know are wrong, gravity again. He's identified three laws. First, gravity overrides direct authority. A study found 78% of CFOs would cancel profitable projects just to hit analyst targets. Second, gravity works through perception, not intention. A manager can preach work-life balance while promoting only workaholics, and the lesson employees actually learn is clear. Third, gravity scales with imbalance. He knew a B2B startup where one client represented 40% of the revenue. That client's casual suggestion about product direction warped their entire roadmap. This creates a nested dolls effect, he says. The CEO feels pressure from quarterly earnings. The division head feels pressure from the CEO. The team lead feels pressure from the division head. It's gravity all the way down. And most people trapped inside these systems don't even realize they're trapped. They think they're making free choices. Then he tells us about John Mackey at Whole Foods. He founded the company on a radical idea: create the happiest workplace in America based on love. When a flood destroyed $400,000 in inventory in 1988, customers, suppliers, and their bankers rallied to save the company. Not because of contracts, because they loved what Whole Foods represented. For decades this worked. Teams rejected products that didn't fit their communities, employees voted on hires, salaries were transparent, customers paid premium prices gladly. Then came venture capital, $4.5 million for 34% of the company. Mackey realized these investors had different incentives. They wanted expansion, standardization, products designed for spreadsheets, not communities. When they threatened to take full control, Mackey went public in 1992 and escaped. He even reduced his salary to $1 in 2006, declaring he wouldn't work for money anymore. Then 2008 hit. Whole Foods stock plummeted 90%. Company remained profitable every quarter, but that didn't matter to the gravity. Here's where everything unraveled. Mackey had given nearly every employee stock options. When the stock crashed, the retirement savings evaporated. When it recovered, nobody wanted to risk another plunge. The obvious solution? Cut prices and address the whole paycheck reputation became impossible. Mackey was imprisoned by quarterly earnings pressure and his employees' stock-dependent futures. The market sensed this vulnerability, and in 2017, a hedge fund seized 8.3% and demanded higher prices and better metrics. Mackey's own board, captured by best practices, couldn't be trusted. He faced an impossible choice: sell to someone, anyone. Amazon stepped up and closed the deal, immediately cutting prices 43%, the exact move Mackey knew was necessary but couldn't execute. The hedge fund made $300 million in 6 months. Whole Foods lost its ranking, its culture, and its soul. But here's what matters. The real victor wasn't the hedge fund. It was the financial gravity itself. The fund was merely the mechanism through which the gravity operated. Deeper insight is this: Whole Foods never needed to be structured that way in the first place. If the company had been built with different governance from the start, there would be no irresolvable tension between Mackey's values and shareholder demands. This reveals gravity's most dangerous effect. We've collectively forgotten that alternative organization structures even exist. Some organizations have discovered how to defy gravity. Others, despite genuine good intentions, fail because their architecture is flawed. The difference is structural. The solutions aren't mysterious. They're learnable, and some require nothing more than courage and a 2-page legal filing. Building strong organizations demands what he calls organizational soulcraft, the art of designing governance that protects your mission from gravity's pull. Rather than fighting harder against an invisible force, we need to build differently. And that's precisely where we're headed next. So here's a question he asks people all the time. Who do you think is the most evil company in the world? Everyone has an answer. Now imagine you've built something you're proud of, and that a morally objectionable corporation offers to buy it for just $1 per share above market value. Would you sell? It could be Philip Morris. Almost universally, people say absolutely not. But here's what troubles him deeply. According to modern governance experts and your own corporate charter, you're legally required to say yes. This principle is called fiduciary duty, and it's ironclad. It doesn't matter who's acquiring your company or what they'll do with it. Under today's governance best practices, any company can be destroyed at will if investors demand it and if this is what's in your bylaws. The Vectura case shows exactly how this plays out. These scientists had dedicated their careers to improving inhaled medicines for respiratory diseases. By 2021, they had a thriving company helping people breathe better. Then, you guessed it, Philip Morris International offered to acquire them for just 10 pence per share more than the competing bid. 10 pence. The board unanimously accepted, claiming fiduciary duty left them no choice. The company that helped people breathe was now owned by a company that profited when they couldn't. Within 3 years, Philip Morris took a $680 million write-down. The real issue here is corporate purpose. Most people think governance is boring compliance work, something for lawyers. But your corporate charter isn't a legal technicality. It's your company's constitution. It determines what your organization legally exists to maximize. Modern charters typically declare companies exist to conduct any lawful business, which sounds neutral. But that neutrality is an illusion. Today, this is interpreted to mean one thing: maximize shareholder returns, period. This wasn't always how things worked. General incorporation, allowing companies to incorporate for any purpose, only dates to the late 19th century. Before that, corporations had to prove they served a defined public benefit. The Union Pacific Railroad was chartered specifically to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Purpose was paramount. Courts enforced this fiercely. But now we've inherited a system that's not natural law or necessity. It's a recent invention, barely 150 years old, and understanding this history is crucial to grasping why seemingly sane people make decisions that seem insane. When corporations first emerged, they operated under a three-legged system that actually worked. Companies were chartered for a specific beneficial purpose only. If they strayed beyond that mission, courts would void their entire charter. Boards had a positive duty to pursue their chartered mission without self-dealing, and they owed shareholders a negative duty: don't steal their money for other purposes. These three legs supported each other perfectly. But in the 19th century, reformers pushed for general incorporation. Anyone could form a corporation for any lawful purpose, without legislative approval. Democratically sensible, but it kicked out one leg of the stool. As courts struggled to interpret any lawful purpose, they borrowed from two opposing legal traditions that pulled in the opposite directions. By the 20th century, particularly after Milton Friedman's influential declarations in the 1960s and Delaware court rulings in the 1980s, one model completely dominated: shareholder primacy, maximize returns. That's it. Here's what astonishes him. This monumental shift was never enacted by legislator or approved by voters. A small cadre of judges, lawyers, and academics made it persuasive to those controlling business, education, and law. We're living under an undemocratic doctrine, and the moral arguments for shareholder primacy don't hold up. Yes, investors provide capital, but so do employees through their time and talent, customers through their loyalty, suppliers through their commitment, and communities through their trust. Yet, unlike employees, shareholders can exit instantly by selling stock. The agency problems they face aren't unique to them at all. The worst part? Shareholder primacy is ultimately bad for long-term shareholders themselves. Companies managing to quarterly targets consistently underperform those with longer horizons. When extraction replaces stewardship, institutions collapse. He's watched exceptional organizations get systematically dismantled, their distinctive qualities stripped away year after year, all in service of maximizing shareholder returns. Boards operate under a stunted job description: maximize shareholder returns and avoid legal violations. Whether a company's mission dies, whether it betrays customers and employees, whether it gets destroyed by a predator, none of that registers as a governance failure. But here's what he learned. We need what he calls an exoskeleton with 4 load-bearing responsibilities. Compliance, yes, the oversight skills boards have developed. But also purpose, a legally binding commitment to what the company exists to maximize, aligned with human flourishing. Coherence, ensuring all systems pursue a singular direction. And integrity, protection from external forces that would corrupt the organization's purpose. This transforms board work into something genuinely meaningful. Companies that betray their promises disappear. Those that endure long enough to keep them thrive. The choice, he believes, is ours to make. So here's a question that changed how he thinks about business. What if your insurance rep was actually your guardian angel? That's how Dwayne describes Amanda, her health insurance rep at Devoted Health. When toxic mold was sabotaging Dwayne's medical treatment, Amanda didn't say that's not our problem. She helped him find new housing, a move that prevented hospitalizations costing $15,000 or more. But that economic benefit wasn't why they did it. It was a side effect of their actual mission, treating every member like their own family. Eric learned these stories from Todd Park, Devoted's founder, and they revealed something profound about what it truly means to care. There's the member who called their Devoted guide in suicidal crisis, and the guide stayed on the phone while coordinating help. There's the member who said, "My life has been filled with hate, but you all listen to me and care for me and remind me what it was like to be loved. This transcends what we typically call healthcare. When Todd first described his vision, building an entirely new full-stack healthcare system, rather than fixing just one piece, it sounded impossible. So Eric peppered him with questions, and his answer reframed everything. You have it backward. This is the only possible way to solve this problem. It only works because it's so hard. And he was right. Our healthcare system is a Frankenstein assembly of thousands of partial solutions. Fix one thing, dysfunction moves elsewhere. So Todd built 3 interlocked companies simultaneously: an insurance company serving seniors, a technology platform called Renoco that functions as a healthcare operating system, and Devoted Medical, a practice recruiting burned-out doctors to provide virtual and in-home care. Most startups die building one company. Todd built all 3 at once, raising $2.3 billion to do it. The economics are straightforward, but require solving a massive multivariate problem. Stay healthy to stay profitable. Offer the best member experience because members have options. And maintain their ethos of building healthcare. Good enough for mom. When he asked what makes this possible, Todd thought for a moment and answered with one word: love. Now I want to address something deeper, he says. Something about how we measure success in the first place. For years, he's been challenging the narrow accounting definition of profit that most businesses use: revenue minus costs. This definition leaves organizations vulnerable to corruption because it ignores the true consequences of their action. Consider a Ponzi scheme. Charles Ponzi collected $15 million in 8 months. By conventional definition, that's profitable. But we know the reality. He was destroying value in the future. Now imagine a chemical company generating revenue while building a toxic waste dump that will cost millions to clean up later. Or a factory dumping waste into a river, forcing downstream communities to pay for water treatment. Those are what economists call deferred liabilities and externalities, ways companies shift costs onto others rather than creating genuine value. Real profit should signal that a company has created new value. When companies profit from the deaths of their customers, like tobacco firms, or deny legitimate insurance claims, they're extracting value, not creating it. And here's what's crucial. Companies that extract rather than create have structural weaknesses. Those deferred liabilities eventually come due. So he's proposing we reclaim the power to define our own purpose. Profit should mean the maximization of human flourishing. The surplus of human well-being an organization creates, accounting for all impacts on human lives across time. The strongest builders he's worked with share an instinctive understanding. The best way to prosper is to create net new value. Consider how our metrics are blind to positive externalities, benefits a company creates that never show up in its P&L. When organizations invest in quality and relationships, those costs appear immediately. The benefits, invisible. This creates a bizarre situation where the most profitable actions look like losses to any spreadsheet. Costco pays suppliers within 30 days instead of the industry standard 60 to 90. That costs millions annually. Yet when shortages hit, Costco gets first access to premium products. That loyalty has no ledger entry, yet it's priceless. The logic is straightforward. When companies grab every dollar, customers, employees, and partners protect themselves. The pie shrinks. Those willing to leave money on the table invite mutual investment. They don't just get a smaller slice of a much larger pie. They become the table itself. This reframes what profit truly means. The real distinction isn't for-profit versus non-profit. It's investor-controlled versus mission-controlled. Using human flourishing as our guide dissolves capitalism's most common critique, that it puts profits over people. When profit means flourishing, this criticism becomes incoherent. Here's what he wants you to understand, though. This path isn't reserved for the extraordinary few. Todd didn't achieve success despite his ethos. He achieved it because of it. The mission didn't follow the money followed the mission. So let's dig into Costco a bit more. Imagine this scene, a heated argument between a CEO and his Craig Jelinek if he raises the price of the company's iconic $1.50 hot dog and soda combo. Jelinek complains they're losing their tails on the deal. Senegal refuses to budge. This isn't a story about hot dogs, but it's the perfect window into what makes Costco extraordinary. Senegal learned everything from Saul Price, the retail visionary who inspired Walmart, pioneered the warehouse membership model. Remember FedMart? Price understood something fundamental. Trustworthiness compounds over time, and Senegal took that lesson and built an empire on it. Here's why that hot dog matters so much. Back in the 80s, when a McDonald's Big Mac cost $1.60, Costco priced their combo at $1.50. Today, the Big Mac costs around $7, but Costco's combo, still $1.50. That's a promise made decades ago and kept in an era of shrinkflation and hidden fees everywhere you look. The numbers are staggering. That single product generates nearly 200 million sales annually. And here's the math that would tempt almost any company. Raising the price just 3% would add $200 million in pure profit, just 3%. But Costco says no. Instead, they take the harder road. When inflation drove up costs, Costco built their own hot dog manufacturing plants in LA and Chicago. They invested in better supply deals. They accepted lower margins. That commitment survived 2 CEOs and became corporate legend. In 2023, their CFO publicly vowed to hold the price forever. This reveals Senegal's true genius. He understood that solving genuinely difficult problems creates trust and loyalty that make everything else easier. What I call a harder is easier leadership model, he says. Look at the results. Costco's membership renewal rates hit 90%. Their stock has returned 28,000% since 1987. Their Kirkland Signature house brand generates $86 billion in revenue. They cap their gross margins at 14% and pay $26 an hour wages. They promote 85% of managers from within and maintain just 8% turnover against an industry average in retail of 60%. But Senegal's philosophy extended beyond hot dogs. When Cloudflare faced what seemed like an insurmountable obstacle, sky-high certificate fees and computational limitations, they adopt his mantra, figure it out. They obsessed over costs, rewrote algorithms in assembly language, rebuilt systems, and created a certificate management system so robust that 12 years later, competitors still haven't replicated it. The breakthrough? Understanding their partners' economics and proposing creative win-wins. But here's the crucial part. When customer conversion initially dropped, Cloudflare didn't panic and change course. They held firm on their mission. Sign-ups increased by an order of magnitude. They earned deep trust from developers, which attracted enterprises. They doubled the encrypted web overnight by offering it for free. And today, Cloudflare handles 20% of all web traffic and commands a $75 billion valuation. Now, he's warning us about something. Saul Price built FedMark on these principles. His investors betrayed him anyway, expelled him, and drove the company into bankruptcy. Jim Senegal could protect what Price couldn't because he built structural safeguards directly into the Costco business model. Financial gravity constantly pulls organizations toward exploding the trust they built. Without actual business model protections, not just posters about values, even great companies succumb. But the irony is this. What sounds radical is actually the most profitable path. High-trust companies grow revenues twice as fast as peers. They deliver 2 to 5 times shareholder returns over a decade. Employees have 74% less stress and 50% higher productivity. Customers are 59% more likely to buy and become evangelists. When Costco aligns their business model so they only make more money by accomplishing their mission, they transform a hot dog into an inflation-proof symbol of corporate character. Their fiduciary duty isn't to shareholders alone. It's to members, employees, and suppliers as a family. Trustworthiness compounds, and that's what separates Costco from everyone else. Here's a profound conviction Eric shares about how organizations actually work, and it goes far beyond the walls of buildings. Once you commit to a building concept, you must exaggerate and repeat that concept everywhere. So wherever someone stands, the message remains crystal clear. But this principle, it applies to everything an organization does. Here's an example. He attends a startup pitch. These founders were developing autonomous drones for agricultural monitoring, spherical robots that could roll, float, or fly across difficult terrain. But something felt wrong. When he asked directly if they could be weaponized, the founder's shoulders sagged. He gets that question constantly, desperate to convince people he wasn't building weapons. Yet his dashboard told a different story. Customer acquisition costs, drone utilization rates, and recurring revenue. He just hired an ex-Raytheon board member. He described exactly how a weapons pivot would happen without even realizing it. Organizations don't get pushed off course by bad intentions. They get pulled by financial gravity. That's the real danger. This founder wanted to be trusted. He wanted investors and employees to see him as mission-driven. But wanting isn't enough. Most companies are mission-hopeful at best. True mission drive demands something far more deliberate, the management discipline ensuring an organization only profits through mission attainment. Look at Devoted Health's virtuous cycle. The healthier we keep people, the more money we make. Or walk into Patagonia. Within 30 seconds, you understand what they stand for. Recycled materials, repair stations, employees who actually use the gear. Everything communicates the same story. That alignment doesn't happen accidentally. Now consider J&J's origin story. When R.W. Johnson prepared for the company's 1944 IPO, he codified their values into what became their famous credo: patients first, then employees, then communities, then stockholders. He carved this into 8-foot limestone blocks and enforced it ruthlessly, even firing his own nephew and son for violations. For 35 years, it worked beautifully. But when Johnson died in 1968, the stone remained, while the will animating it vanished. By 1975, a senior executive presented the new reality: 5 balls to juggle, 4 white, 1 red. The red ball was profit. You could drop any white ball, but not the red. In the back of the room, newly promoted President James Burke stood up and declared, "Today all the balls are red." Burke understood what was happening, and he immediately instituted the Credo Challenge, forcing leaders to confront difficult choices using their stated values as a guide. That preparation proved crucial when cyanide-laced Tylenol killed 8 people. Burke immediately pulled $100 million worth of product from the shelves. Critics called him a fool, but J&J's reputation for integrity enabled swift recovery. Yet even this famous case teaches only crisis management, not the years of leadership discipline that preceded it. Tragically, later generations forgot these lessons. By 2002, CEO William Weldon talked about earnings growth while the credo receded. Compliance reviews were eliminated, bonuses tied to financial targets instead of credo commitments. By 2009, when Motrin tablets proved effective, J&J had lost its muscle memory entirely. This descent reflected something economists call surrogation. When metrics become targets, organizations forget what they measured. J&J optimized around earnings growth, which became a proxy for mission success. While the company sold baby powder containing asbestos for decades, with internal tests showing contamination they failed to disclose. By 2024, over 62,000 cancer patients had sued. So here's what he's learned. Metrics and corporate character are inextricably linked. Southwest Airlines understood this beautifully during their best years. They built around 4 competing metrics: lowest cost, highest employee satisfaction, highest customer satisfaction, and highest profits. The genius was the tension between them. You couldn't slash staff to boost costs because employees would suffer. You couldn't gouge customers because satisfaction would expose the betrayal. This structural tension prevents any single metric from becoming a false proxy for success. Patagonia learned this the hard way. During the early 2000s, they expanded to over 100 factories chasing cost savings. By 2010, they admitted they'd lost track of actual conditions. Their response? They built structural safeguards. Their social and environmental responsibility teams got veto power over supplier decisions. When they discovered Taiwanese mills where migrant workers had their passports confiscated and paid $7,000 broker fees, they didn't promise improvements. They simply said no. Today, their business, quality, social, and environmental departments meet weekly with mutual veto power. The brutal truth is this. Watch what companies do consistently, not what they claim. Without the discipline of actual systems backing up missions, companies are merely mission hopeful. Culture grows from what management institutionalizes. It reveals true character in moments when no one's watching. When you commit to a mission, you must commit completely. Everything else follows from that conviction. So that's the first half of Incorruptible. Ries's core argument is that mission drift isn't usually the result of bad actors, but of structural financial gravity that intensifies as a company becomes more successful. The more valuable the organization becomes, the golden goose, the stronger the incentives for short-term extraction, whether from investors, governance norms, or internal pressure. He shows how conventional corporate structures often make it nearly impossible to stay true to a founding mission over time. He begins laying out why building protective mechanisms early is both harder and ultimately easier than trying to fix things later. A few things worth thinking about as we move into the second half of the book. If you're an early-stage company, are you treating governance and ownership design as strategic work, or are you deferring it? If you're a more established company, what structures are currently protecting or exposing your mission? And perhaps more importantly, how might the companies that succeed at staying incorruptible gain competitive advantages that conventional models simply can't match? Eric points out that investors are keen on keeping the safeguards low so that they have the maximum number of options in the future. But that's not in the company's best interest. Tune into our next episode, number 100, for more of this story from Incorruptible by Eric Ries. Everything we've covered today lives inside a larger pattern I've been tracking across medtech programs for 30 years. Timelines that slip, AI that adds risk instead of reducing it, products built without the architecture to support what's coming next. The gap between where most teams operate and what the next decade requires is real, and that's what I find for a living. If you want to close that gap, connect with me through www.innoguide.net. Systems thinking, AI integration without added risk, embedded ML readiness, built from 66 delivered medical products, not theory. And if you're a medtech leader who wants to work through these problems with peers who are inside the same pressure, MedX is where that happens, monthly. The join button is on my LinkedIn page. That's where to find me. I want to thank Steve McIntyre for producing this, and I really want to thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next time for part 2. That's a wrap.